Henry VI, Part 3rd. Major characters: Henry VI, Duke of York, Duke of Gloucester, and Duke of Somerset. Queen Margaret, Edward York, Richard York's eldest son, who eventually takes over his father's struggle, becomes Edward IV. Richard York, Richard York's son, born with physical deformities, secretly determined to attain the throne. Clifford, supporter of Henry and out for revenge on York for having killed his father in the Battle of St. Albans. Earl of Warwick, plays a pivotal role in getting Edward to the throne but switches sides after Edward makes a rash decision that has Warwick looking like a fool. The story. The play begins right after Part 2 left off, with York and his followers in the throne room of the palace. Just as York sits down on the throne, Henry and his followers enter. York makes his calm to the throne. The weak leader that he is, Henry proposes a deal to York that Henry be allowed to rule until his death, upon which the crown will pass to York and his descendants. York agrees and leaves. Henry's followers are shocked by his submission, and Margaret is so disgusted by his willingness to disinherit his own son, Prince Edward, that she leaves him. Margaret has raised an army and launches an attack on York. The Battle of Wakefield. The Yorkists are defeated, and York's young son, Edmund, is killed by Clifford. Revenge for York's killing of Clifford's father during the Battle of St. Albans. Clifford and Margaret then capture York and torment York, eventually stabbing him to death. Edward and Richard receive news of their father's death and are both devastated and determined to continue his fight. The tide turns at the Battle of Towton, with Edward's forces victorious. Clifford has been killed. Henry flees to Scotland and Margaret to France. Edward crowns himself Edward IV and gives titles to his brothers Richard and George. In an aside to the audience, Richard reveals his own ambitions to ascend the throne someday. Henry is captured and imprisoned in the Tower of London. In France, Margaret appeals to King Louis XI for military aid in restoring Henry to the throne. Warwick has also travelled to France on behalf of Edward, proposing that Edward marry Louis's sister-in-law, thereby ensuring peace between the two countries going forward. News arrives, however, that Edward has rashly married a beautiful widow, Lady Grey, Elizabeth. Humiliated, Warwick switches allegiance over to Henry, even offering his daughter as a bride for Prince Edward, and leads French troops in battle against Edward. Edward IV's brother, George, is also disappointed in his marriage. and abandons him to support Henry. Edward VI is taken prisoner. Although Henry is restored as king, it is in name only. He appoints George and Warwick to rule as Lord Protectors. Edward is soon sprung from captivity by his followers, including his son Richard. At the Battle of Barnet, George switches allegiances back to Edward. Warwick is killed, and Henry is once again captured and imprisoned in the Tower of London. The Yorkists are victorious in the Battle of Tewkesbury, and Edward subsequently kills Prince Edward and banishes Margaret to France. Edward's brother Richard goes to the tower to kill Henry, who, before dying, prophesies Richard as the cause of widespread destruction and suffering. The play closes with much celebration surrounding the end of the war and birth of the king's son, also named Edward. No one suspects Richard's steely ambition to attain the throne himself.